Hey there, I am Dave. I am a history podcaster, and today I'm going to be reacting to one of my favorite videos on YouTube, and that is Hitler Oversimplified. And I haven't seen this video in a while, so my reaction should be fairly raw. And let's get into it.
Look at this baby. So gentle, so innocent. You'd think this child would grow up to become a good man, an honest man. Well, think again.
Yep, that's Hitler as a baby. It's a famous picture of him.
Hitler was born Adolphus Hitler in 1889 in a small town in Austria-Hungary. His father, Alois Schicklgruber, was born out of wedlock, but eventually changed his name to that of his stepfather, becoming Alois Hitler.
Yeah,
Alois was a mid-level...
A point historians often make about this is imagine if Alois, his dad, had never actually changed his name to Hitler and it was Schicklgruber. Could you imagine Adolf Schicklgruber with the same sort of resonance that Hitler had as a last name? It's a fun thought to think about, or it's an interesting thought to think about the difference, what that would have meant for Hitler's political career.
Austrian customs officer. Not really rolling in cash, but certainly rolling in women. He married a rich, older lady, but then immediately started having affairs, including one with a much younger house servant. A few years later, he left his sick wife to be with his mistress, but since the Catholic Church didn't allow divorce at the time, he couldn't marry her. So he waited for his old wife to die and had a child in the meantime. Then his wife died, so he married his mistress and had another child, but then his new wife got sick, so he employed his much younger cousin Clara to take care of her. Then when his new wife died, he immediately got Clara, his cousin, pregnant, and then married her. In that order, you rock star. Clara and Alois had 3 children together, who all tragically died while in infancy. So when the 4th child, Adolf, came along, Clara spoiled him rotten. The Hitlers had 2 more kids, and the family moved around a few times, meaning Adolf had to attend...
Yeah, Hitler famously was really obsessed with his mom. He was kind of a mother's boy, and when Hitler's mom died later, this was a huge sort of breaking point for Hitler in his young life, and he was known for his sort of dramatic nature with which he would react to things. He had intense highs and intense lows emotionally, and this would be true of him throughout the rest of his life, especially as the leader of Germany. And I was actually just reading something really interesting from the archives online of the FDR library, and the American government had put together a whole psychological report analysis of Hitler, and they focused a lot on things like his relationship with his mother and all these other kind of family dynamics that tried to help explain why it was he was such an aggressive megalomaniac. And of course, to this day, there are still people who ponder this question, and they always go back to his relationships with his family.
5 different elementary schools. Adolf's father was strict, quick to anger, and took most of it out on the eldest son until he had enough and ran away at the age of 14, leaving 7-year-old Adolf to do most of the chores and get berated by his father. The result was a difficult relationship with his dad, while he was super attached to his mother, who worried over him and his health excessively. Hitler did well in school at first. His grades were good and his teachers praised him. He was popular with the other kids and enjoyed gathering them together to play war games. He also loved reading and particularly liked stories.
Yeah, I forget if he mentions this, but Hitler loved the American Westerns, specifically in cowboy and Indian stories. He, throughout his life, loved those stories.
Stories about cowboys and Indians. As he grew older, though, he started to get into trouble. He was caught smoking once, organized a raid on a local orchard, tormented his pro-Austria religion teacher with symbolic gestures, displaying his allegiance to the idea of united Germanic people under a greater German state in defiance of Habsburg Austria. You know, the usual. All of this enraged Adolf's father, who punished him severely. The area of Austria-Hungary that Hitler lived in was once part of the German Confederation, and many of the people who lived there considered themselves to be German. Adolf tended to just go against whatever his father said, and since his father was an Austrian public official, Hitler got big into German nationalism. This enraged Adolf's father, who punished him severely. Around this time, a family tragedy struck. His 6-year-old brother, whom he loved a lot, died of measles when Adolf was 10, and was buried in the cemetery just across from their home. Around this time, neighbors reported a change in the young boy. Strange behaviors such as talking to trees and staying up late staring at the stars from the cemetery walls. He lost interest in religion, and his school grades started to decline. which enraged his father, who punished him severely. It also didn't help that he had...
Just something that I'm trying to do as a podcaster is try to come up with these little catchphrases like Oversimplified does. You can see it in the comment section here. Everyone loves the small catchphrases, punished him severely. It's harder than it seems to find those catchy things.
Just entered high school, and the cool city boys treated him like a rural peasant. He had to repeat a grade and had little interest in most school subjects, instead spending his time reading and drawing, which he was quite good at. One day his father said, "Son, someday you'll be a big balls public official like me." And Adolf replied, "No, father, I'm going to become an artist and soar high above the clouds with the eagles." This enraged his father, but by this time he was an old-ass man, so he just sort of let it go, and then died of a lung hemorrhage. Hitler just about passed his final semester and celebrated in the typical way by getting blackout drunk and wiping his ass with the certificate. However, he didn't take the overall final school exam, instead just dropping out. The now 16-year-old boy was unemployed without much purpose.
You can notice the Wagner poster on the wall. Hitler was famously really into the music of Wagner. He would go to a lot of his concerts in Vienna when he lived there, and there's a piece by Wagner called the Gotterdammerung, and specifically there's a part of it called Siegfried's March where it's a perfect soundtrack for the fall of Berlin in the spring of 1945 because of the dramatic nature of it, and it's often used in war documentaries about World War II towards the end of the war on the European front. I would check it out if you could. There's also a famous story in April of 1945 where the German Philharmonic Orchestra, Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, plays Richard Wagner as the Soviets are, the Red Army is at the gates, if you will, of Berlin. And there's a famous story, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, but that Nazi officials were passing out cyanide tablets to people so that they would be able to kill themselves before they were taken as prisoners and treated horribly by because there were stories of rape and brutality of the Red Army as it captured Germans, and so it was a way out. And they supposedly passed these out at that Philharmonic Orchestra.
In life, and for the next 3 years, he stayed that way. He spent most of his time at the opera with his only friend, August Kubizek. Kubizek later wrote his memories of the young Hitler and said he was passionately interested in many things, felt he was in many ways better than others his age, was quick to anger just like his...
Kubizek is one of the few sources we have about Hitler in this time. And so he's become a pretty important figure for historians as a primary source.
Father, and an incredible speaker once he was ranting. When he was 18, he said a very sad goodbye to his mother and went to Vienna to take the entrance exam for art school. He failed. Soon after, he had to return home. His mother was sick, and her health was rapidly deteriorating.
Yeah, here's where she dies.
Hitler stayed by her side, and when she eventually died, the family doctor said he had never seen someone so overwhelmed with grief as Hitler was. Then Hitler returned to Vienna, still hoping to find a career in the arts, but he never did. Instead, without parental support, Hitler ended up on the streets. Now in his early 20s, he spent a few rough years living in and out of homeless shelters, making what little he could from selling postcards he painted. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when and how Hitler's extreme ideological beliefs formed, but his time...
Yeah, this is a huge debate among scholars today about whether his time in Vienna, how much of his time in Vienna contributed to his anti-Semitism. There was famously a mayor of Vienna at the time who was hugely anti-Semitic, and of course there were publications and magazines that supposedly, there's even a newsstand that historians can trace to see that Hitler likely would have gotten anti-Semitic publications off of. And a lot of people theorize that this is a time period in which he really developed his views against the Jews. Of course, he didn't talk about it. Hitler didn't have the platform to express his own opinions very much at this point. There's recollections of him ranting and raving at the various homeless shelters he would stay at. Really, his anti-Semitic views came in terms of him talking about it, after World War I.
Vienna would have certainly played a role. Anti-Semitism was widespread in the city. The mayor, whom Hitler supported, was an outspoken anti-Semite.
Yeah, there he is.
There were many right-wing anti-Semitic newsletters, which Hitler took a keen interest in. He bought into the conspiracy theories and became a firm believer in the idea that there are many races in constant struggle with one another, the purest of which were the German Aryan people, and the worst of which, he believed, were Jews. Since Austria-Hungary was a multi-ethnic empire full of lesser races, Hitler wasn't a fan. So when he was 24, he moved to Munich in Germany to avoid doing military service, and for one more year he was a drifter on the streets, until something huge happened. In 1914, long-standing tensions in Europe erupted into the First World War.
Yep,
Crowds across Europe celebrated the news. Within days, Hitler volunteered for the German army. The war gave him a purpose in life. His fellow soldiers gave him friendship and brotherhood. Despite the horrors of war, Hitler considered it...
I don't know if he's going to mention it here or not, I kind of forget, but... he actually, the Austrian authorities actually came after him, because by leaving Austria, he was born in Austria. By leaving Austria and going to Germany, he actually got out of or he looked like he was fleeing his duty to serve in the Austrian army. But I forget all the details of exactly how he gets out of that. But eventually, he's able to just serve as a volunteer He's able to just serve in the German army in World War I.
Be the best time of his life. He was reportedly a brave soldier and was awarded the Iron Cross, first class. He was also very lucky and had many close encounters with death. His luck ran out in 1916, however, when an artillery shell injured his leg. He went back to Germany to recover and was outraged to find a general apathetic anti-war attitude among the exhausted and hungry German populace. With the war turning against Germany, he returned to the front lines, but was temporarily...
Yeah, the reason Germany was so hungry was because of a blockade that the Allies had put on Germany, and so they kept food and other resources from entering into Germany, and this created a huge amount of public outcry at the conditions within Germany at the time, and was a big reason that led to the German surrender at the end of World War I, and actually led to what's not known as well, which was a German Civil War at the end of World War I. The first little glimpse we had into a sort of right-wing versus left-wing street battles and physical altercations, of course, which would be famously characterize the Weimar Republic, which was Germany in the post-interwar period.
Blinded by a British gas attack in 1918. A month later, still recovering in hospital, Hitler learned of Germany's defeat and surrender. The terms of the peace treaty were tough on Germany. It had to pay a lot of money and lose a lot of soldiers. These conditions weakened Germany and humiliated the German people. Europe's borders changed after the war too. New countries were formed out of Russia's lost territory. Austria-Hungary was dissolved, and there was one big new country.
Quick point about that Treaty of Versailles. There's a historian I like, Victor Davis Hansen, and his theory, at least I'm sure it's not unique to him, but what he talks about is how people claim that the Versailles Treaty was too hard on Germany, which led to a rise of nationalism and led to fascism in Germany and ultimately Hitler in World War II. And they claim the Versailles Treaty being so harsh on Germany contributed to this. And there's no doubt that that's true. But what Victor Davis Hansen talks about is how actually the Allies weren't harsh enough on Germany following World War I, and what should have happened was a Allied occupation of Germany to suppress a lot of the extremist movements that arose following the end of the war, like movements like the Nazis. And this is what the Allies did after World War II in places like Japan, and also places like Germany with the denazification. And that's what should have happened at the end of World War I, which might have then kept something like the rise of Nazism from happening in Germany.
Splitting Germany into two. Hitler, seeing the country he loved humiliated like this, said that hatred grew in him for those responsible, by which he meant communists and Jews, who he believed had stabbed Germany in the back by spreading dissent and anti-war propaganda back home.
All right, that's it. That was part one. I'll definitely do a reaction to part two, and probably at the end of my part two reaction have some more concluding thoughts. But yeah, my name's Dave. I'm a history podcaster. You can check out my podcast in the description, and I hope you guys have a good day.